Let's talk to political analyst Olufemi Lawson on the recent developments regarding the just concluded election. Good to have you join us.
Good afternoon, Precious.
Good afternoon. So we had about 28 election in about 28 states. That's a governorship election. 24 has been declared. 2 states, Abia and Enugu, suspended. 2 declared inconclusive. That's Adamawa and Kebbi. But when you look at the results declared so far, does it sort of give you a picture of how politics and governance will look like in the next 4 years?
Definitely, you see, a lot of states where these elections have been held, majority of the states, 28 out of our 36 states, what I've been saying as the outcome, in most cases, have been a verdict on the performances of the various political parties that has either won or lost election in this state. It was today, ordinarily, is beyond just selecting leaders. Like I said, it's a verdict of the people on their expectations from some of these new political parties that are beginning to win election in those states, or some of those parties whose mandate have been renewed in those states. And it is going to have a very far-reaching effect on what becomes the fortune of these states in the next 4 years, where these new governors are going to be in the reign of leadership across the state. So definitely it is going to have its impact on what becomes the fortune of the various states in the next 4 years.
And what statement do you think we have made in this particular election? Because I've listened to people who say that the ruling class and leaders would know better now to sit up and not take the people for granted. Do you think that from now would have been able to make that kind of statement where our democracy and our politics have moved just a bit higher from where it used to be?
Yeah, it's not yet Uhuru. We are not yet at that point where we can say in the overall that we have gotten to the point where, election becomes, a total assessment of the performance of leadership. It is still a long journey, because when you consider how nascent our democracy is, you realize that there are still a lot of factors that are at play in our elections, which makes it totally impossible to access the victory of otherwise of political parties or their candidates in our election on the basis of performance. That nonetheless, we have also seen situations whereby performances have been rewarded in this election. Let us cite the instances of states, presidential election. Some political parties candidates won in those states, but rather than expecting a bandwagon effect, what we witnessed during the governorship election were different. A case of Oyo and Ogun State, where during the presidential and National Assembly election, the governing APC won virtually all the National Assembly positions in Oyo State, won the presidential election in Oyo State. But last Saturday proved otherwise, because the governor, based on the assessment of his performance by the people of Oyo State, was returned in a landslide victory, same as members of the State House of Assembly. If you look at Ogun State, you look at the performance of the governor, despite the criticisms and opposition, seems to have been the reason why the people of Ogun State have chosen to return, because if it is on the basis of what you hear in the media and some of these things you see on the social media, and if you go to Bauchi State, the contest was so deep that ordinarily a lot of public opinion didn't favor the incumbent returning. So what we are saying is that performance will also be part of those key indicators to who becomes elected or not in our future elections. Though, like I said, other factors are currently at play, but performance of various elected public officials are beginning to become a factor, or one of those factors, rather, that people are not considering in electing leaders or sending them out.
Mr. Lawson, there's still a gap in the attention we pay to the the legislative elections, whether it's the National Assembly or the State Houses of Assembly, especially the State Houses of Assembly. What impact will that have, and how do we begin to correct that?
It is such, because if you look at the National Assembly, is even still fair when you talk about some level of independence. But for the state assemblies, they virtually be reduced to appendages of the governor's offices, because most people who occupy the positions in the state assemblies, including the leadership of these assemblies, are unpicked by the various state chief executives, the governor. And why is this so? Because the assemblies are not independent. Their source of finances, their projects and everything attached to the survival and operation are attached to the whims and caprices of people who are governors. But with the various reforms that are being experienced now, with the recent amendment signed a few days ago by President Buhari, and some other amendment that we think should be proposed into our constitution, the assemblies will begin to become independent to the extent that candidates who are elected into the assembly now become answerable to their constituents rather than the governor at the center. And if we don't get this independence, we don't secure this independence for the state assemblies, just like the National Assembly is a bit independent of the federal executive, we may not have anything different from what we are having now. But with the reforms that are being introduced, particularly with this independence given to the state assemblies, who can now
that definitely will have impact, especially going into the next 4 years. We'll see how that plays out. Thank you so much for your thoughts, as always. Political analyst Olufemi Lawson. Let's take a break.